The small, secluded village of Black Hollow was known for its eerie silence and the thick fog that clung to its cobblestone streets. Nestled deep within a dense forest, the village was a place where time seemed to stand still. The villagers were superstitious, and whispers of the supernatural were as common as the cold winds that swept through the valley. But nothing could have prepared them for the events that unfolded on that fateful autumn evening. It was the funeral of Old Man Grayson, a reclusive figure who had lived on the outskirts of the village for as long as anyone could remember. His death had been sudden and mysterious, and the villagers couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as they gathered in the dimly lit church for his final rites. The church, an ancient structure with crumbling stone walls and stained glass windows, was filled with a scent of burning candles and damp wood. The priest, Father Alistair, stood at the altar, his voice echoing through the hollow halls as he recited the prayers for the dead. The coffin, a simple wooden box, lay at the center of the aisle, its lid closed tightly. But amidst the somber atmosphere, one presence stood out. A large black dog named Shadow. Shadow belonged to the gravedigger Thomas and was known for his keen senses and unwavering loyalty. The dog had been sitting quietly by Thomas's side throughout the service, but as the priest's prayers grew louder, Shadow began to grow restless. At first it was subtle, a low growl, a twitch of the ears. But soon, Shadow's behavior became impossible to ignore. The dog's hackles rose and he began to pace back and forth in front of the coffin, his eyes fixed on the wooden box. His growls grew louder, more urgent, and the villagers exchanged uneasy glances. "Shadow, quiet," Thomas hissed, trying to calm the dog. But Shadow ignored him, his attention entirely focused on the coffin. The dog's behavior was so unusual that even Father Alistair paused mid-prayer, his brow furrowing in concern. "What's wrong with the dog?" someone whispered. "He senses something," another replied, their voice trembling. The tension in the room was palpable. The villagers, already on edge, began to murmur among themselves. Some suggested that Shadow was simply agitated by the storm brewing outside, while others feared that the dog's behavior was a sign of something far more sinister. Father Alistair, sensing the growing unease, decided to address the situation. "Perhaps it's best if we proceed with the burial," he said, his voice calm but firm. "The storm is approaching, and we must lay Mr. Grayson to rest before it arrives." The villagers nodded in agreement, eager to leave the church and the unsettling atmosphere behind. But as they prepared to carry the coffin to the graveyard, Shadow's behavior took a dramatic turn. The dog lunged at the coffin, barking furiously and scratching at the wood with his paws. "Shadow, stop!" Thomas shouted, grabbing the dog by the collar, but Shadow was relentless, his barks echoing through the church like a warning. Father Alistair, now visibly disturbed, approached the coffin. He placed a hand on the lid, his expression grave. "There's something wrong here," he said quietly. "I can feel it." The villagers watched in stunned silence as the priest hesitated, his hand trembling slightly. Then, with a deep breath, he made a decision. "Open the coffin," he instructed. The villagers gasped, their fear mingling with curiosity. No one dared to move, but Father Alistair's commanding presence left no room for argument. Reluctantly, Thomas and two other men stepped forward and began to pry open the coffin lid. As the lid creaked open, a cold gust of wind swept through the church, extinguishing the candles and plunging the room into darkness. The villagers cried out in fear, their voices drowned out by the howling wind. When the candles were relit, the scene before them was one they would never forget. Inside the coffin, Old Man Grayson's body lay still, his face pale and lifeless. But something was terribly wrong. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling, and his lips were curled into a grotesque smile. The sight was so horrifying that several villagers fainted on the spot. Father Alistair, though visibly shaken, remained composed. He leaned closer to the body, his eyes narrowing as he examined it. "This is no ordinary death," he murmured. "There's a darkness here, a malevolent force." The villagers, now in a state of panic, demanded answers. "What do you mean, Father? What's happening?" The priest straightened up, his expression grim. "I believe Mr. Grayson's soul is trapped," he explained. "Something prevented him from passing on, and now his spirit lingers, restless and angry." The villagers' fear turned to dread as they realized the implications of the priest's words. If Old Man Grayson's spirit was indeed trapped, it could bring untold horrors to the village. They pleaded with Father Alistair to do something, to banish the darkness before it was too late. The priest nodded, his resolve firm. "We must perform an exorcism," he declared, "but it will not be easy. The forces at work here are powerful, and they will not give up without a fight." The villagers, though terrified, agreed to assist the priest in any way they could. They gathered the necessary tools, holy water, crucifixes, and ancient scriptures, and prepared for the ritual. Shadow, still agitated, remained by the coffin, his growls serving as a constant reminder of the danger they faced. As the exorcism began, the atmosphere in the church grew increasingly oppressive. The air was thick with tension, and the villagers could feel an unseen presence watching them. Father Alistair's voice rang out, strong and commanding, as he recited the prayers of exorcism, but with each word the darkness seemed to grow stronger. The coffin began to shake violently, the wood splintering as if something inside was trying to break free. Shadow barked furiously, his eyes fixed on the coffin. The villagers screamed, their fear reaching a fever pitch. Father Alistair, undeterred, continued the ritual. He sprinkled holy water on the coffin and held up a crucifix, his voice rising above the chaos. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I command you to leave this place," he shouted. For a moment, there was silence. The coffin stopped shaking, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The villagers held their breath, hoping that the darkness had been banished. But their relief was short-lived. Suddenly, the coffin lid flew open and a dark, shadowy figure emerged. It was Old Man Grayson, but he was no longer human. His eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and his body was twisted and distorted. He let out a blood-curdling scream, and the villagers scattered in terror. Father Alistair, though shaken, stood his ground. He raised the crucifix high and continued to recite the prayers, his voice unwavering. The shadowy figure lunged at him, but the priest's faith held strong. With a final, desperate cry, the figure disintegrated into a cloud of black smoke which dissipated into the air. The church fell silent once more, the only sound the heavy breathing of the terrified villagers. Father Alistair lowered the crucifix, his face pale but resolute. "It's over," he said quietly. "The darkness has been banished." The villagers, though relieved, knew that they would never forget the horrors they had witnessed that night. Old Man Grayson's body was buried in a secret location, far from the village, and the church was consecrated once more to cleanse it of the evil that had tainted it. As for Shadow, the dog remained by Thomas's side, his loyalty unwavering. But the villagers couldn't help but notice that the dog's eyes seemed to hold a new depth, as if he had seen things that no living creature should ever witness. The events of that night became a cautionary tale, passed down through generations in the village of Black Hollow. And though the years passed, the memory of the dog who sensed something strange in the coffin and the priest's chilling reaction remained etched in the minds of all who had been there. The days following the exorcism were tense in Black Hollow. The villagers, though relieved that the immediate threat had been vanquished, couldn't shake the feeling that something was still amiss. The air in the village felt heavier, as if the darkness had left a permanent mark on their home. Whispers of strange occurrences began to spread, shadows moving where there should be none, faint whispers in the dead of night, and an unshakable feeling of being watched. Father Alistair, though exhausted from the ordeal, knew his work was far from over. He spent hours in the church, praying and studying ancient texts to ensure that no trace of the malevolent force remained. But even he couldn't ignore the growing unease that seemed to permeate the village. Shadow, the black dog, became a symbol of both hope and fear. The villagers admired his bravery and intuition, but they also feared what his heightened senses might detect next. Thomas, the gravedigger, noticed that Shadow had become more restless than ever. The dog would often sit by the window, staring into the forest with a low growl, as if he could see something no one else could. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the village was bathed in an eerie twilight, a young girl named Eliza went missing. She had been playing near the edge of the forest when she vanished without a trace. Her parents, frantic with worry, searched for hours before alerting the rest of the village. The villagers organized a search party, armed with lanterns and tools, to comb the forest. Father Alistair joined them, his presence a source of comfort and strength. Shadow led the way, his nose to the ground as he followed a scent only he could detect. The forest was unnaturally quiet, the usual sounds of wildlife absent. The trees seemed to close in around them, their gnarled branches casting long, twisted shadows in the flickering light of the lanterns. Shadow's growls grew louder as they ventured deeper into the woods, and the villagers exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, they reached a clearing, a place the villagers avoided, for it was said to be cursed. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient withered tree, its branches twisted like claws reaching for the sky. At the base of the tree lay Eliza, unconscious but alive. The villagers rushed to her side, relief washing over them, but as they lifted her, they noticed something strange. Scratched into the bark of the tree were symbols, ancient, twisted runes that seemed to pulse with a faint, malevolent energy. Father Alistair's face paled as he recognized them. "These are symbols of binding," he said, his voice trembling. "They were used to trap souls and harness dark energy. Someone, or something, has been using this place for ritual." The villagers' relief turned to dread. If the darkness had returned, it was more powerful than they had imagined. That night, the village was plagued by nightmares. Villagers awoke in cold sweats, their dreams filled with visions of shadowy figures and the twisted tree in the forest. Some claimed to have seen Old Man Grayson's face in their dreams, his grotesque smile haunting them even after they woke. Father Alistair knew that the darkness was not gone, it had merely retreated, biding its time. He called a meeting in the church, urging the villagers to remain vigilant and to report any strange occurrences. But even as he spoke, he could see the fear in their eyes. They were losing hope. Shadow, too, seemed to sense the growing threat. The dog refused to leave Thomas's side, his eyes constantly scanning the shadows, as if expecting an attack. One night, as Thomas slept, Shadow began to bark furiously, waking the entire household. Thomas grabbed his lantern and followed the dog outside, only to find the graveyard bathed in an unnatural greenish light. The graves were disturbed, the earth freshly turned as if something had clawed its way out. Thomas's blood ran cold as he realized what had happened. The dead were rising. The village descended into chaos. Shadows moved on their own, whispers filled the air, and the undead roamed the streets. Father Alistair rallied the villagers, urging them to fight back against the darkness. Armed with holy water, crucifixes, and whatever weapons they could find, they prepared for a battle they never thought they'd face. The battle raged for hours, the villagers fighting with everything they had. Just as it seemed they were on the verge of defeat, Father Alistair had an idea. He remembered the ancient tree in the forest, the source of the darkness. If they could destroy it, they might stand a chance. Gathering a small group of brave villagers, Father Alistair and Shadow made their way to the clearing. The tree loomed before them, its twisted branches seeming to writhe in the moonlight. The runes on its bark glowed with an eerie light, and the air was thick with malevolent energy. Father Alistair began the ritual, his voice steady as he recited the ancient words of banishment. The villagers poured holy water on the tree, and Shadow barked furiously, his presence a beacon of hope. As the ritual reached its climax, the tree began to crack and splinter, its roots tearing free from the earth. With a final deafening roar, the tree exploded into a cloud of ash and smoke. The darkness dissipated, the whispers ceased, and the undead crumbled to the ground. The village of Black Hollow was finally free. The villagers rebuilt their lives, but the memory of the darkness lingered. Father Alistair continued to watch over them, his faith stronger than ever. Shadow, hailed as a hero, became a beloved figure in the village, his loyalty and bravery a reminder of the light that could overcome even the deepest darkness.